You take a bite of food. It tastes incredibly bland. You reach for a small glass shaker resting quietly on the table. You sprinkle tiny white crystals over your hot meal. Your tongue instantly detects the sharp change. The flavor sharpens dramatically. Your brain rewards you with a sudden rush of deep pleasure. For about 300,000 years of human existence, this exact moment was completely impossible. This is not just a story about ancient cooking. It is a fundamental story about human survival. You absolutely need salt to live. Your body is essentially a carefully balanced microscopic ocean of water and sodium. Every single time your heart beats, it is because sodium ions are moving rapidly across cell membranes. Are you aware of how fragile this internal ocean really is? Every time a complex thought flashes through your brain, salt is conducting the electrical charge. Without it, your muscles begin to cramp painfully. Your central nervous system slowly shuts down. Your vital organs eventually begin to fail. How did your ancient ancestors secure this vital mineral before deep mines, global trade routes, or convenient grocery stores even existed? To understand this biological mystery, you must travel back to the Pleistocene epoch. You are a nomadic hunter-gatherer living on the vast African savanna. The hot sun beats down relentlessly on your bare skin. You are constantly sweating as you move. When you sweat, you lose essential water, but you also lose precious sodium. You are actively losing the very chemical that keeps your heart beating. Where do you find more in this endless wilderness? You cannot simply walk to the distant ocean. You cannot dig a deep salt mine with your bare hands. The dry earth around you offers absolutely no visible white crystals. How do you replace what the sun takes from you? You find your life-saving salt by hunting wild animals. Large herbivores like deer, antelope, and wild cattle spend their entire lives foraging for specific plants that contain trace amounts of sodium. Their complex bodies concentrate this rare sodium directly in their warm blood and dense muscle tissue. When you successfully hunt an animal and consume its fresh meat, you are not just getting essential protein and fat. You are consuming a highly concentrated dose of the salt that the animal spent months painstakingly gathering. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, meat was your primary and only reliable source of sodium. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham developed the groundbreaking cooking hypothesis, which looks closely at how early hominins adapted to eating and cooking raw meat. When you cook fresh meat over an open crackling fire, it becomes significantly easier to chew and digest. The vital nutrients become instantly more accessible to your starving body. You do not need to add any seasoning to it. The rich blood and cooked tissues of the animal provide all the sodium your complex nervous system requires. You do not crave salt in crystal form because your body is already completely satisfied. Do you realize how perfectly balanced this ancient biological system was? For hundreds of thousands of years, this invisible chemical exchange kept your ancestors alive. You followed the massive migrating herds across the landscape. You hunted with sharpened wooden spears. You ate the cooked meat. You unknowingly absorbed the salt. You survived another harsh day. You eventually migrated out of the African continent. You walked cautiously across frozen land bridges during the bitter cold. You settled deeply in the dense forests of Europe and the vast open plains of Asia. You hunted massive woolly mammoths and large elk. As long as you ate cooked meat, your biological need for sodium was quietly and perfectly fulfilled. You never once looked for a salt shaker. Then, about 10,000 years ago, absolutely everything changed. You made a monumental decision that altered the course of human biology forever. You stopped walking endlessly. You settled down in one place permanently. You planted tiny seeds in the dirt. This was the dramatic dawn of human agriculture. You began to grow large fields of wheat, barley, and rice. You domesticated docile animals instead of actively hunting them, meaning you actually ate meat far less frequently. Your daily diet shifted drastically from wild game to cultivated green plants. Do you know what happens when you stop eating wild meat? Here is the hidden biological problem with plants. Most agricultural crops are incredibly poor in natural sodium. Potassium is highly abundant in plants, but sodium is virtually non-existent in the leaves and stems. You are eating massive wooden bowls of grain. You are eating baked flatbread. You are eating thick hot porridge. Your stomach feels completely full, but your microscopic cells are slowly starving. Your body is experiencing hyponatremia, a dangerous and potentially fatal drop in blood sodium levels. You feel incredibly weak when you wake up. Your tired muscles twitch uncontrollably. Your head aches constantly as you work in the fields. Why is your new, advanced agricultural lifestyle suddenly killing you? You are suddenly facing a profound and terrifying nutritional crisis. The fresh meat that once provided your salt is now a rare and precious luxury. You need a completely new source of sodium, and you need it immediately. This quiet biological desperation forces you to look at the surrounding landscape completely differently. You begin to notice the strange behavior of wild animals. You watch wild deer licking the wet mud near certain bubbling springs. You see agile goats scaling steep rocky cliffs just to lick the bare stones. They are experiencing the exact same plant-based sodium deficit that you are. What happens when you follow them? You follow them to the water. You taste the wet mud. You taste the cold rock. It tastes incredibly sharp. It tastes exactly like life. Archaeologist Anthony Harding has spent many years deeply studying early European salt production, specifically focusing on how ancient agricultural societies solved this exact nutritional problem. His fascinating research reveals that as soon as farming firmly took hold, humans became entirely obsessed with extracting salt from the natural environment. They absolutely had to do this to survive. It was no longer a passive and natural part of their daily diet. It became an incredibly active, desperate, and dangerous pursuit. So let us recreate a normal day in an early Neolithic village. You are somewhere in modern-day Romania near an ancient site called Poiana Sărată. You wake up exactly when the sun rises. You are not going to the green agricultural fields today. You are walking for miles to a salty spring bubbling up from the dark ground. You carry heavily porous clay pots on your aching back. You fill these heavy pots with the briny, foul-tasting water. You build a massive, roaring wood fire. You place the wet pots directly into the hot flames. You wait for hours. The water slowly boils away, leaving behind a thick, dirty, salty crust on the inside of the baked clay. You violently smash the clay pot to pieces. You carefully gather the precious, dirty white chunks hidden inside the shards. This complex process is called the briquettage technique. Are you willing to destroy your own handmade tools just to survive? You are trading enormous amounts of physical labor, chopped firewood, and perfectly good handmade pottery just to get a tiny handful of salt. Why would you ever go to such extreme and wasteful lengths? Because without it, your growing children will grow weak and eventually die. Without it, you absolutely cannot preserve the fresh vegetables you grew for the long, freezing winter. Salt has suddenly and violently become the most important physical substance in your entire world. As human populations grew rapidly, scraping dirty salt from boiling broken pots was no longer enough. You needed vastly more to sustain your massive cities. Deep in the towering mountains of modern Austria, there is a legendary place called Hallstatt. The dedicated researchers at the Natural History Museum in Vienna have excavated this massive site extensively over many decades. They found something truly astonishing buried in the dark earth. By the early Iron Age, ancient humans were descending hundreds of feet into the solid earth, carrying burning pine torches to hack violently away at solid veins of rock salt. Imagine being a terrified prehistoric miner in Hallstatt. You crawl on your hands and knees through narrow, pitch-black dirt tunnels deep inside a collapsing mountain. The stale air is impossibly thick and incredibly hard to breathe. You are constantly swinging a heavy bronze pickaxe at the unyielding rock walls. You load the heavy, sharp chunks of rock salt into fragile leather backpacks. You climb precarious, rotting wooden staircases back to the distant surface, your muscles burning in agony, your lungs gasping desperately for fresh mountain air. The daily conditions are absolutely terrifying. The risk of a sudden cave-in is a constant, lingering fear. You are literally risking your life every single day in the dark. For what? For a simple mineral that your hunter-gatherer ancestors used to get naturally just by eating their dinner. Does human progress always mean a better life? This extreme danger was not limited to just the dark mountains of Austria. The profound need for salt entirely reshaped human movement across the globe. Archaeologist Thomas Fenn has extensively mapped how this desperate need for salt created the very first global trade routes. Salt became so incredibly crucial to human survival that it literally shaped the borders of human civilization. You built massive stone roads simply to transport it safely across continents. You waged bloody, horrific wars to control the natural springs. You even used it as hard currency to pay professional soldiers in the Roman Empire. The very word salary comes from the Latin word for salt, salarium, because it was literally the money used to buy this vital mineral. Your entire modern, comfortable world was fundamentally built on the biological panic of early farmers who realized their plant-based diets were slowly killing them. Without this intense pursuit, human civilization as you know it would have collapsed entirely. But the pursuit of salt was not just about daily biological survival. It was also about the terrifying prospect of the approaching winter. If you live in a cold climate, you cannot grow fresh food all year round. You must harvest your crops in the autumn. You must slaughter some of your animals before the snow falls. How do you keep this essential food from rotting completely? You use salt. Salt pulls moisture out of the meat through a process called osmosis. It creates an environment where deadly bacteria cannot possibly survive. This magical preservation technique allowed early agricultural societies to survive long, brutal winters. You pack your raw meat in heavy layers of precious salt. You hang it in the cold air to dry slowly. You are banking your entire future survival on this simple chemical reaction. If you do not have enough salt, your food will rot. If your food rots, your entire family will starve in the snow. Do you understand why they were willing to die in the mines? The transition from a nomadic lifestyle to a sedentary one completely altered the human relationship with the natural world. In the Paleolithic era, you were a seamless part of the wild ecosystem. You took what the earth freely offered, moving constantly to avoid exhausting the local resources. But in the Neolithic era, you attempted to master the earth. You cleared the dense forest to plant grain. You forced the wild animals into small pens. You changed the very rules of survival. But you could not change your internal biology. Your body still silently demanded the exact same chemical balance it had evolved to expect over hundreds of thousands of years. This fundamental mismatch between your ancient biology and your new modern lifestyle created a permanent state of dependency. You were no longer free to simply wander the earth. You were firmly tethered to the salt springs. You were heavily dependent on the deep mines. You were entirely reliant on the massive trade networks to bring you the white crystals. The agricultural revolution was incredibly successful at producing more raw calories, but it completely failed to provide the necessary micronutrients. Think about the incredible irony of this monumental historical shift. You worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk to grow massive fields of golden wheat. You built permanent stone houses to protect your family from the harsh elements. You created complex human societies with laws and written languages. You thought you were conquering the untamed wilderness. But deep down, at the microscopic cellular level, you were actually starving. Your brain was constantly sending out desperate panic signals. Your muscles were constantly twitching with exhaustion. You were entirely at the mercy of a tiny, invisible chemical compound. The story of human civilization is not just a story of grand technological progress. It is also a story of constant biological compensation. You invent a new way of living, and then you spend the next 10,000 years desperately trying to fix the unintended biological consequences. Today, this ancient, desperate biological drive still lives deep inside your brain. Your modern brain is still hardwired to crave salt as if it is a remarkably rare, life-saving resource. When you taste a heavily salted potato chip, your brain releases a massive, satisfying surge of dopamine, screaming at you to eat more, because it still firmly thinks you are a starving Neolithic farmer. But you are not actually starving. You live in a remarkably bizarre modern world where salt is abundant, incredibly cheap, and completely hidden in almost everything you eat. The ancient biological craving has not changed at all, but your physical environment has completely transformed. The very survival mechanism that once kept your ancestors alive on the dry plains of Africa is now the exact same thing causing modern heart disease and hypertension. You take a bite of food. It tastes bland, so you reach for the white crystals, sprinkling them until the flavor sharpens, your brain rewarding you for securing a mineral that for 300,000 years, you never even had to look for.